Welcome and good afternoon. We're delighted you could join us for what we hope will be and we believe will be a very lively and informative both talk and then conversation afterwards. We're particularly pleased to welcome Raissa Robles, a courageous investigative reporter from the Philippines. Raissa is the author of a new book, Marcos, Martial Law, Never Again, a brief history of torture and atrocity under the Marcos regime. She is the publisher, webmaster, writer of the investigative and news blog RaissaRobles.com. And she's also, which that blog has been judged the best society and politics blog in the Philippines by the Philippine Daily Inquirer, ABS-CBN, and Rappler. Robles is also the senior Manila correspondent of South China Morning Post, Asia's oldest daily. And this is her first visit to the United States. And we're delighted to welcome her to the Graduate School of Journalism. Raissa will speak and has a talk about journalism in the Philippines, which I think you'll find very informative. And then we'll have a conversation and open the floor for questions. You should know that this event is being live streamed, and we're thinking that people in the Philippines could be watching and participating online with us today. And it may be the first time that we've done this in this room, which has been retrofitted. And we're just really delighted to welcome you. And it's been wonderful to get to know you online. And we've had a lot of fun working together. So welcome and thank you for coming.
Good afternoon. I can say he's a tough editor. Made me cut down my speech. Okay. Oh, that's the wrong. Wait. Yeah, no, just put it the first. Okay. Okay. I'm deeply honored to be with you all today. Before I go on, I would like to thank John Temple, Director of the Investigative Reporting Program, for inviting me. When I first talked to him, I could sense he must be a tough but fair editor, and I'm glad I passed his test. I would also like to thank Julie Hirano, the assistant to the dean and the events coordinator, for taking care of the nitty-gritty. People like Julie are the hidden treasures of every organization. Briefly, I would like to thank the Philippine American Writers and Artists, Inc., or PAWA, its board of directors and its president, Edwin Lozada, who made my first US trip happen, as well as Susan Poe Rufino, the Bay Area residents Susan Poe Rufino, Mila de Guzman, and Lenny Marin, who put together my very tough lecture tour, along with Rene Siria Cruz, Edwin Batambacal, and Lorenz Listana. Finally, I would like to thank my husband, Alan, my tough editor and news partner. Our breakfasts are like daily news conferences. We work as a team, and my publisher, Filipinos for Better Philippines, which had the courage to publish my book, Marcos Martial Law, Never Again. The trustees are mainly retired Ateneo de Manila University graduates who wanted to embed the national catastrophe of authoritarianism into the nation's collective memory. What is it like doing investigative reporting in the Philippines? Sunshine has a magical quality in Manila where I live, especially after a monster storm. It makes many things look bright and fresh and full of hope. A year into the Duterte presidency, sunshine for me has taken on an even more dazzling quality. When I look at the trees, with the sunlight bouncing off the leaves, it brings the preciousness of life to hyperfocus, especially against the backdrop of knowing that at least 10,000 funerals have been held in just 1 year because of Duterte's war on drugs. Many Filipino journalists, including me, are acutely aware that at any time of the day or night, we too could be arrested or killed. This is why one journalist I know always carries a passport in his bag, just in case. Under Duterte, death comes in the form of tandems, two people riding a motorcycle. One drives, the other behind him shoots. Some say these killers are actually policemen. Reporters are not special, as President Duterte himself bluntly pointed out during his first post-victory press conference of May 21 last year. He said on national TV, just because you're a journalist, you are not exempted from assassination if you're a son of a bitch. He said, most of those killed, to be frank, have done something. You won't be killed if you don't do anything wrong. He asserted that most of the journalists killed had taken bribes or were corrupt. He was quite clear. Freedom of expression won't save you. The Constitution cannot help you if you smear a person. This is the kind of president we have. President Duterte is right about one thing. Just because we are journalists, we are not exempted from assassination. But who decides whether we are sons of bitches? Who decides whether we are writing stories in exchange for bribes? Most politicians look on investigative reporting as a smear job intended to ruin the reputation. Never mind the truth behind the allegations raised by a report. And in my country, I remember a quote to the effect that it's cheaper to hire an assassin than a lawyer. The Philippines has always had a reputation for being one of the most dangerous countries in the world to be a journalist. During the dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos, matters were straightforward. The press was strictly controlled and censored. Marcos cronies owned all the major dailies and broadcast studios and regularly put out state propaganda. There were small alternative newspapers, the mosquito press as we called it, but they functioned under constant threat. The financial daily I worked for, Business Day, was about to run a report on the coconut monopoly established by Marcos cronies. The editor got a call from one crony who asked if it was true that some staffers who wrote the report were in the military order of battle as communist subversives. Back then, subversives was the convenient word the dictatorship used to describe the critics, enemies, and victims. Today, it's drug addicts. My publisher got the hint and didn't publish the report. But after Marcos was chased out of the country and democracy and press freedom restored, please remember we have the same Bill of Rights as the United States. That's written in the United States Constitution. Freedom of the press, speech, and assembly. And every policeman is supposed to read the Miranda Doctrine whenever they arrest someone. Okay. After the Marcos was chased out of the country and democracy and press freedom restored, the killing of journalists continued at an astounding level. 21 under President Corazon Aquino, the democracy icon, 11 under President Fidel Ramos, the hero of EDSA, 6 under Joseph Estrada, a shocking 82 under President Gloria Arroyo, 34 of them killed in just one afternoon. All because two of our political allies in the province of Maguindanao squabbled over who should run for governor. And one of them, the Ampatuan political clan, decided that the best way to resolve the contest was to wipe the other out literally, together with the journalists covering them. This massacre of 34 male and female journalists on November 23, 2009 in Maguindanao during Arroyo's presidency set a world record in impunity and attack on press freedom. To complete the picture, there were also 35 killed under President Benigno Noynoy Aquino III. In Duterte's first year as president, 4 journalists were separately killed in the countryside by gunmen on motorbikes. None of them has been linked by the police to any corrupt dealings or to drugs. My colleagues and I have been subjected to other forms of harassment and intimidation for writing stories investigating Duterte's war on drugs. The offices of Reuters and Rappler News have been separately visited by police officers asking to verify if people who had gone to the police to ask for police reports on drug-related killings were indeed the reporters. The last time such visits took place was during Marcos martial law over 30 years ago. Since Duterte assumed office, a systematic and vicious online campaign has been going on to smear all journalists critical of Duterte's drug war. This is an example of a meme that was shown. That was uh, proliferated on Facebook. And this is an example of somebody on Twitter who told me these things, who kept tweeting and tweeting to me. It's but a short step to persuading the digital mob and Duterte's rabid followers and vigilante killers that journalists, like drug addicts, are fair game for execution. This one repeatedly tweeted to me, "You need to die now." Okay. I'm not the only one being threatened this way. Jam Sisanta of GMA TV News followed up President Duterte's accusation that his political nemesis, Senator Antonio Trillanes, had a hidden bank account in Singapore. After her story aired, she received a private message through Facebook accusing her of being paid by Trillanes and warning her that if she did not watch out, her corpse would be stuffed in a sack. The Philippines Revised Penal Code would classify these messages that I and Jam received online as grave threats. But it's doubtful a journalist who complains would be given the time of day because the complaint would naturally fall under the National Bureau of Investigation's Anti-Cybercrime Division. The NBI is under the Department of Justice, and Justice Secretary Vitaliano Aguirre accused the media 2 months ago of being paid by the drug lords in order to derail Duterte's drug war. 2 reporters, Manuel Mogato and Karin Derma, were specifically singled out for online bashing after they correctly quoted Duterte, comparing him to Hitler. Rappler's Malacanang Palace reporter, Pia Ranada Robles, has been unfairly bashed online, called many names including cunt, because she dared to ask Duterte pointed questions about why he had whistled at a female reporter, and because her last name was Robles, like mine. Duterte supporters circulated this meme online. Even when I said on Twitter and on Facebook that I never met Pia nor her husband, surnamed Robles, and we weren't at all related, the malicious propaganda went on. Well, it died down a bit after I started calling those who persisted on spreading the lie idiots, and others tweeted it with glee. The largest broadcast network, ABS-CBN, which continues to probe Duterte's drug war, has also been threatened by the president with non-renewal of its license to operate, which expires in 2020. The top-selling Philippine Daily Inquirer that has run investigative reports highly critical of Duterte's drug war is poised to change ownership after Duterte launched blistering attacks against the Prieto family who own controlling shares. The Inquirer took out its reporter, Marlon Ramos, from Malacanang. Given what Marlon has gone through, it's understandable why he held up this sign last September 21, the recent anniversary of Marcos' declaration of martial law. As for me, given all that has been happening, including being called a paid hack of former President Benigno Aquino III and daughter of Communist Party founder Jose Maria Sison, I don't know in what planet the Duterte supporters think it's possible for me to be both, given that Aquino and Sison despise each other. I must confess that due to all the bashing and online threats directed against me, I found myself unable to finish my investigative stories on Duterte's drug war. It was partly writer's block, but mainly fear, and also sadness when I found some of my personal friends and media colleagues supporting Duterte. I myself initially liked Duterte's initiatives to hold peace talks with the Muslim and communist rebels. I agreed with his stance against mining and rooted for his plan to ban labor-only contracting. But I became deeply alarmed by his closeness to the Marcos family and his vow to kill 100,000 criminals and dump their bodies in Manila Bay that the fish will grow fat. Even if this was an exaggeration, there were already previous reports of mysterious killings in Davao City while he was the mayor. Way back in 2009, I had written about it for the Morning Post, wherein I mentioned a 103-page report by the New York-based Human Rights Watch. The report mentioned that mysterious killings in Davao rose from 2 in 1998 to 124 in 2008 while he was mayor. Human Rights Watch said, "We found evidence of complicity and at times direct involvement of government officials and members of the police in killings by the so-called Davao Death Squad." It concluded that the words and actions of longtime Davao City Mayor Rodrigo Duterte indicate his support for targeted killings of criminal suspects, but the report did not name him as the mastermind. Because of this report, I expressed my personal fear and frustrations that the victory of Duterte would usher in a period of bloodbath. I wrote this on Facebook and Twitter on the eve of the presidential elections. To all those backing Duterte, just remember when the killings start, you should be beside him all the way. Even after the river of blood overflows, stand by him and tell yourself you helped the blood flow. You are very much a part of it. Don't wash your hands off it. Be proud of what you've done. That single post went viral and unleashed a storm of invectives, insults, and malevolent wishes for my early death. As a journalist, did I have the right to post what I did, or did I step beyond the bounds of fair play and impartiality? I believe a journalist does different kinds of writing. I've always considered Facebook and Twitter more like opinion writing. Marcos did not care for human rights. Neither does Duterte. Being a journalist under the Duterte administration has its own unique dangers. You won't be arrested or censored by the government, but you can be attacked by its online propaganda apparatus. This is thousands, no, tens of thousands of supporters and trolls who in cyberspace attempt to shout you down, insult you, demean you, belittle your work, and fabricate facts to prove you're wrong. In investigative reporting, I always keep in mind what the poet Robert Frost wrote about discerning truth. He said, "We dance round in a ring and suppose, but the secret sits in the middle and knows." Ferreting out the truth is paramount. For instance, in 2012, when I started a probe on the unexplained wealth of Supreme Court Chief Justice Renato Corona, the mainstream newspapers were ignoring my blog posts. But later, even the Philippine Daily Inquirer and ABS-CBN were forced to write about my blog post when Chief Justice Corona himself admitted my story that indeed A U.S. property linked to his family was in the name of one of his daughters. Before I close, I would like to tell you a bit about my book, Marcos Martial Law, Never Again, A Brief History of Torture and Atrocity. The most difficult part of the book was, how do I interview accused torturers without them getting angry at me? I had to rely on all my skills to get them to talk to me, and I must confess, on God. The result is this book, which has interviews for the very first time of generals and colonels, and even a former Philippine president talking about military torture for the first time. In closing, I would like to challenge Berkeley's Investigative Reporting Program with the following leads. The leads may be a dead end or may lead to possible future stories. One, a source claimed to me that one of the political strategies of President Duterte's campaign, which included vicious online bashing and fake news as political propaganda, was also involved in President Donald Trump's presidential campaign. That the Duterte campaign was in fact a test bed for such a campaign. John Temple knows well, he removed it from this, but he knows which PR agency was involved. Okay. During the 2016 election campaign, a Ukrainian went around the different campaign headquarters of the presidential candidates in Manila, offering his services to raise an army of online trolls for a fee in US dollars. I verified this with one of the political camps. The purpose of the troll army was to bash supporters of rival candidates while posting praises for at least one candidate who had accepted the service. In 1985, the San Jose Mercury News in California ran a series of investigative reports on the Marcoses' hidden wealth. It won the Pulitzer Prize the following year for international reporting. Perhaps the Investigative Reporting Program of Berkeley, under its Pulitzer Prize-winning director John Temple, could include as part of its investigation the link between the Trump campaign and the Duterte campaign, for starters. Thank you. Okay. Might fall over. Okay.
She said I was a tough editor, but I didn't know that I was inviting an assigning editor to give me more work. She didn't think I had enough work here at Berkeley, so she thought it was a good idea to assign me some more.
Yeah. Before you start, I would like to give this to your IRP.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I haven't dedicated it later.
Yeah, I'll get you to.
Yeah.
So thank you for those remarks, and for, I think we can all take away the how dire the situation and how difficult the situation is in the Philippines for journalists, and also for, of course, for residents of the Philippines.
Yes.
Because we're at a journalism school, I'd like to start by talking about some of the journalism issues that Raissa raises, and then we'll open it to the audience, and there may be other issues. And some of them are from reading Raissa's book. And I think it's fair to say that your father was a very important influence in your life. And you say one thing in your book that I think would be very interesting for the students, which is that you describe how your father told you to concentrate on your studies and not become a student activist. He even imposed a curfew on Raissa, so she could not leave the house after a certain time of night, and it was very early. And so what would you tell the young journalists in the room today? Be a student activist or focus on your studies? Because there's really a challenge here in the United States for young people about activism versus working as journalists, I think. And I wonder, in your own experience, how you feel about that today.
Well, I think I did miss out something on
Yeah.
something. Um, don't put the onus on me for that. But it's, I think studying is also very important because it gives you a discipline. And what I would suggest also for journalists nowadays is to make sure that you also know your accounting and your math and the business side, because a lot of stories, you can't understand the stories unless you know the business and economy, because so many things are impacted by that. But I would say, yeah, study. But then, one of my editors never graduated from college. Yes.
You talked about the
Oh, okay. Sorry.
yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Good advice.
Thank you.
Now you see, he's your assigning editor.
Yeah.
It's good. I don't have to. You can't assign to me. He's assigning to you. This is
Okay.
much better. Um, you talked about the purchase of the forced sale of the newspaper, the Inquirer in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you can talk about. And you were very honest in actually, it's very rare to hear a journalist describe pulling back on reporting, knowing to admit that the chilling effect of the threats against them uh, has had an effect, that they've actually, typically journalists like to pretend or act courageous in a way, defiant. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about what you see as the chilling effect of the sale of the Inquirer, because it is a business issue, right?
Yes.
And also how you made that decision to pull back on your reporting and how you feel about that.
Okay. The sale of Inquirer, this is not the first time that Inquirer was under threat. The former president, Joseph Estrada, also tried to, suffocate the Inquirer through the pull out of ads from his business cronies and from the movie industry, but that didn't work. I think, well, Inquirer is an institution for over 30 years. And but I'm not sure if that would have a chilling effect on the population, because a lot of readership for print newspapers has been falling,
Mm-hmm.
as,
Like here.
even in the
Yeah.
United States. But clearly, I think, but what will happen, I think, is that news will evolve in the Philippines as in the United States. And you cannot really, journalists are journalists because it's in their blood. And then they will find a way to do other things, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The second question is,
Well, about you made the decision, so obviously they wanted to force the sale of the paper to shut down that voice,
yeah,
to silence that
yes,
voice. But I think it'd be, when you take into account how do you decide how far you can go as a journalist. That was a very defiant, a very strong Facebook post you made on the eve of the election, and obviously attracted a tremendous amount of response and invective against you. So when
yes.
you're reporting now, how much in the back of your head is the threat against you?
Okay, for so many months, I mean, I have so many unfinished stories. I know I have the data, but they're all unfinished because I'm afraid of the consequences. And then, I find myself, when I take a cab, I find myself looking always at the back, on the left, to the right, and I'm wondering that if someone would ever, if there's a motorcycle that ever pulls beside me, what am I going to do? You know, so there really is this fear,
Yeah.
and I'm not the only one who has this fear. A lot of journalists have that fear. Uh, and that has actually, I couldn't write for months, even for South China Morning Post, The thing that broke that was when I found out around May this year that should martial law be imposed, that I would be among those to be arrested. And I realized whatever I do, I had been pulling back. But if martial law were to happen, I'd get it. So I thought to myself, so I might as well write the things that I want to do, I want to write before I get arrested. And that's why I came out with two investigative reports in South China Morning Post about Duterte and about the military, very long pieces. And I would also like to say that I'm doing a book tour around the United States, and I have decided that the articles that I haven't published, that are half written, I'm going to disclose the data that I have, and I have an exclusive that I will disclose in New York.
That's great.
Yeah.
You're going to do that in the United States. Congratulations. I think one thing where you also show a lot of courage and something difficult for journalists to do is interviewing the torturers themselves, who are frightening people, frightening for you, right? I mean,
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to talk about that a little bit more from a journalistic standpoint, about how you did that and how you approached an interview, because I think journalists can shy away from confronting people who've done evil things and not bring that to light. And I think one of the powers of the book is the witness testimony, not just from the victims, but from your confrontations or encounters with torturers and abusers. And I wonder if you can talk about, for students, the importance of that.
Yeah. You know, my publisher was really at my back. I was late in submission, but I thought that the book would not be complete if I did not get the side of the torturers. Because I felt, from my past experience, reporting in Business Day during martial law, I knew, uh, I, I learned that even, the people who are on the other side, people who are, uh, whom others widely think as evil, they do have a viewpoint, and you've got to listen to them, you know, and they have a certain perspective that would um, give what you're writing about a new look. I just felt that. And also, I wanted this book to break the silence, on torture and rape that happened during martial law. Not one of those that I interviewed among the military men would admit that rape ever happened, although there were victims of rape. Among the detainees. Okay, how did I interview torturers? With great difficulty, uh, because I was afraid that they'd get back at me. You know, I mean, after writing, but it turns out that some of them were ready to talk. That they also wanted their side to be heard. Okay, let me, for instance, illustrate Colonel Eduardo Matiliano. He was the only one who was court-martialed for torture. And I bumped into him. I never interviewed him before. And I asked him, can I interview you? And he told me, oh, would you like to write my biography? So I said, well, why not? So we met, and then I told him, in order for me to write your biography, you have to be truthful. You have to say, the truth about your past. And then I asked him about torture, and at first he would not say anything. You know, there's uh, there's a there's something that I learned from years of interviewing. You've got to ask your source, how many minutes do I have? You know, if you only have like 15 minutes, you have to go for the jugular. You cannot go, but if you have all the time in the world, then you can set up the atmosphere, you can gain the trust, you know. But with Colonel Matiliano, he seemed like he was about to bolt away at the same. So I had to ask him point blank about the torture, and he laughed. The first time I asked him, he laughed actually loud. And the others, one of them I interviewed on Facebook through direct messages. So we were exchanging messages. That was General Vic Bata. Fidel Ramos, nobody had ever asked him about torture. Never. What I did was I went to a press conference. Everybody there was very pleasant, laughing. And here I am asking him suddenly, "Sir, can you tell me more about the torture that happened?" And you know, because he was the head of the administration of detainees, commandant, you know. And then he suddenly, he suddenly became serious. You know? And then I managed to get in three more questions, but he never agreed for a sit-down interview with me, which is very interesting. You know? But then the 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 reason why President Ramos um, answered me was because earlier in 1992, he was campaigning for president. And then I jumped on board the flatbed truck where he was campaigning, you know. He was waving. That was in Pampanga. And then suddenly I asked him, I had a tape recorder, and I asked him, "Sir, I would like to ask you about this certain woman who's been going around saying that she has the influence. Actually, uh, she was widely known as his mistress." And then the Pampanga governor looks at me very curiously. I interviewed him before. And then Ramos, in between waving to the crowd, said, "Oh, she's just a friend." And then, and then I said, I added the question because it was widely, you know, that she was going to use her influence uh, for favors. And then I asked Fidel Ramos, "I understand, sir, there's a son." And then he denied it. Yeah, there's
There
a
was a
son.
son.
There-
They had a son.
he denied it. And then the next moment, uh, this is something uh, that bugs my conscience. And then the next moment, he's gone. He's missing in the campaign. He flies to Switzerland, and there was there were rumors that uh, a boy tried to commit suicide. So, you know, I felt conscience stricken.
Yeah, yeah.
But then, when Ramos became president, this is very interesting about Ramos. When he became president, my publisher, Berigo Belmonte, asked me to cover the launching of his book. So I went there. And then I was getting I was getting him to autograph my book. And then he looks at me, and then he's very, very civil to me. He writes a dedication, but I could see that, you know, there was this muscle jumping up and down, up and down. So that was, I mean, the, that showed Ramos had very good control of his emotions, in contrast to Duterte, who has poor impulse control.
We're familiar with poor impulse control in this country. We've
Yeah.
witnessed it. We have a microphone here in the auditorium here in the library, and we'll have one more question. And please feel free to stand at the microphone and ask your question, so it'll be recorded, so people who are watching on the streaming. I just have one more question, and you
Yeah.
have such great stories. And one thing that really struck me from the book was that um, you wrote that from 1986, when Marcos was forced into exile, until 2015, no Filipino school book detailed the human rights abuses of the Marcos regime. There was literally no education of the children in the Philippines of what had actually happened under the dictator. And you write that now you're concerned that there's a yearning among Filipinos for a strong man. And so I wonder, sort of a two-part question, are people in the Philippines, is the press informing people in the Philippines about the abuses of Duterte? And how concerned are you about the strongman and the potential for another era of martial law in the Philippines?
Okay, I think the press is also holding back a little on the abuses of Duterte because he's very, very popular and people are listening more to him than to the press. And he's been smearing the press with his online trolls, you know. And how how do I think that? Okay,
Yeah.
my thinking is that he doesn't even have to impose martial law. He can do it with the help of Congress that is behind him, with the help of the Supreme Court that seems to bow to him, you know. And it's very interesting. But this wasn't part of your assignment for me, you know. So, but it's very interesting that when I was writing the book, I could see that he was taking steps, the same step kind of steps that Marcos was taking. That's a
Mhm.
topic of my talk at the Bayanihan Center on Friday, on Thursday.
Here in San Francisco?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great.
So how concerned am I? Very concerned. Because what I'm concerned about is there might be a bloodbath. Because his followers are very, very ready to take up arms. And if you can see the police, not the military, but the police, they seem to be very trigger happy. And he has a lot of a small following of
Mhm.
rabid followers because, well, well, I'm thinking that he has a lot of online trolls, and you don't know if these are bots or real people, but a lot of his followers are also overseas in the Middle East. Some are in the US, you know. They're scattered all over the world. They're not here in the Philippines. What I am concerned about is that he might impose a revolutionary government, which is the same thing as saying a dictatorship or authoritarianism, because he does have authoritarian tendencies.
Why don't we open it? Why don't feel free for anybody to come to the mic? I'll just, while we're coming to the mic, I'll just say one thing that I learned very interesting before the session was that I was very surprised that Raissa had never been to the United States before. And because she's such an accomplished journalist, and obviously the US has such deep relationship with the Philippines. And I thought maybe please come to the mic, but I thought while you're doing that, you could explain, because I thought that was very informative for me, why you had never come. It's okay, you're a friendly audience here. You can say it.
Yeah, I didn't like what America did to my country at the turn of the last century and after the Second World War. So I was sort of boycotting, you know, the United States because of the Phil-American War. And after the Second World War, instead of rehabilitating the Philippines, it rehabilitated Japan, which was the enemy, you know. It just completely left the Philippines devastated in 1946. And that's the reason why. But then it was actually the former ambassador Philip Goldberg, whom Duterte has claimed is gay. I don't know if he's gay, uh, who actually softened my view, because I had a debate with him when he invited several of us for a off the record
Yeah.
conversation. Yeah, and that sort of told me that, you know, as an American official, he was open to counter reviews.
Well, we're delighted that you're here and at an American university where we can hear your views and about your experience. So thank you so much. And why don't you go ahead and identify yourself and then.
Hi, my name is Noel de Jesus, and I am a writer of fiction. I'm not a journalist. However, I am involved, I get involved on social media trying to fight this, join this resistance and tell the truth, because the social media, as you already pointed out, social media is where I believe the battle is going on. And my question is actually about the phrase, sorry, I'm breathless, chilling effect. I want to know where the phrase came from. Was it from Raissa, or maybe, I don't know, because I actually go and read everything, even at risk of health and nervous system. I read the trolls. I read the real ones. I read Mocha Uson, just because I believe that it's important to know what they are saying. It's important to know what they are saying and what they believe, because within that 16 million followers, there are people that are smart and intelligent and want the best for the country, all together with the ones that are just what they call rabid and blind followers. And I believe that some kind of bridge or discourse can be, well, I try or believe that it can be had online, precisely because they have demonized the mainstream journalists. The people who support mainstream journalists, yellow journalists, they call them yellow because yellow is the color of the Aquino thing, the Liberal Party, all that anger. And right now, as we speak, this week, last week, because I'm always looking, chilling effect is a phrase that people are saying, what are you talking about, chilling effect? You're all attacking, you're free, there's no martial law, so there's freedom. What chilling effect exists? And there's a mocking from those quarters of even that term. So when you say the chilling effect of invective and insult and death threat, well, we're getting it too, they'll say on the other side. So, and they say it does not exist. It is not a right thing to say. But today, Raissa, when you said PNP, Philippine police, have been going to the newspapers and saying, who wrote this? Who wrote that?
Exclusive.
I don't, people online don't know that, and the followers take advantage. They say the chilling effect is social media attacks, which is a chilling effect, but it's not as bad as police officials going to the papers and saying, did this guy really write that? Is this reporter really? And I agree that that is a true chilling effect, but I'm concerned about what's happening on social media because they don't know. They don't know, and so my question is, can you discuss chilling effect in detail, and make it, a real?
I can't remember if it's used in your book or not, to tell you the truth. I can't remember if you say it. I mean, I'm not a historian of journalism, so I cannot recall when it was first introduced as effect. Tom, I don't know if the first time chilling effect was. I know for a long time, but I mean, I don't know what century it goes back to.
A legal concept in journalism, or just in the world. I mean, because it's being taken as a phrase and joked about and mocked.
Well, it's hard to mock. I mean, I think one thing that came clear in Raissa's talk is that when people are being assassinated off of motorcycles, that is a pretty obvious threat, and journalists take that seriously. And when the police visit a newsroom, for anybody who's worked in a newsroom, it's highly unusual for police to visit a newsroom. They might ask you to talk to them. There might be but not coming into the newsroom and exerting their sort of authority in a newsroom setting. That would be highly, highly unusual, and it would be perceived as sending a message. And it's pretty hard. Look, it's hard when we're having this conversation today that there's clearly analogies with, although there's differences in extreme between the United States and what's happening in the Philippines. And when you have a leader using the language of Duterte and saying things like sons of bitches, and which we've had our own president calling people sons of bitches, it sends a message to his supporters that these people are the other and are to be outside, not trusted, dangerous, worthy of punishment. There's so many, I mean, and when a leader, there's so much power vested in that position that when a leader speaks in that way, it carries weight that, you know, our speech does not. And that's why we always think that there's something, you know, there's speech of leaders. They're not speaking as themselves, they're speaking for their position. And when they speak with their position in a way that is hostile to a group in society, whether it's Muslims or communists or whatever group it is, it could be any group, it carries a tremendous weight. And so it's not about the back and forth between individuals. It's about the power of the state being exerted against a group and saying, we perceive you as the enemy, which is why when the President of the United States discussed the US press as literally the enemy of the people, invoking a history of that term, it's frightening. And it's legitimately frightening. And that's what the chilling effect
Thank you.
is. That's what
Thank
it
you.
means.
That's amazing. That's exactly what I wanted.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Can I attend your class?
I'm teaching in half an hour, so.
Hi, thank you for coming and speaking. I was wondering if you, in the Philippines, if you use the word yapa, the Thai word for speed, or methamphetamine, or if you use a different word. I was wondering, shabu. Shabu. Is the shabu produced locally, or is it imported from Myanmar or North Korea or somewhere else? And is the chemicals that take the drug and refine it furthermore, the precursor chemicals, were you able as a journalist to follow the manufacturing and the money trails that produced widespread drug use across the country?
Yeah, I've been writing about that for South China Morning Post because a lot of the drugs come from China. So
my question is,
Wow.
and the precursor chemicals come from China.
Is this reaction against the drug use in the Philippines partly a shadow ethnic bias against Chinese Filipinos or Chinese ethnic people, the Wa in Myanmar, or other Asians who may be manufacturing it, but who may be just being lumped in with other ethnic Chinese minorities? Chinese Filipinos control a lot of money in the Philippines, and I'm just wondering, is there an ethnic dimension to this war against drugs?
No, there's just Duterte's view that drugs are bad and they make people who use drugs are subhuman. But for a fact, no, because I write for South China Morning Post, my editors often ask me to write about arrests of Chinese nationals, Chinese nationals who have been caught with precursor chemicals or have been caught in drug busts. No, so I've been writing about them since the year 2000, and I've done a lengthy report on the problem of shabu, which Hong Kong calls ice. And most of the drugs really come from China, and the precursor chemicals come from China. And whenever um, there are drug busts, drug traffickers being busted, Chinese nationals are often involved. There was one particular case that my editor asked me to follow up. That was the conviction of several Chinese nationals, they were convicted for life. And then one day, I get a call from somebody who tells me that this person who got convicted for life wanted to talk to me while he was in jail. Apparently, he had a phone inside, cell phone, and he wanted me to talk to him because he was asserting that he was innocent. At that point, I held back. I didn't want to get involved in something like that. I didn't know if he was telling the truth, or if he was going to bribe me. It's very hard to cover uh, stories on drugs. But let me assure you, most of the most of the chemicals and most of the shabu that are found here come from China, because the Philippines is used as a transshipment point and also as a market for those kinds of drugs.
We have quite a few questions.
Yeah.
So thank you, sir.
Yeah, Eric Lachica from Washington, D.C., U.S. Filipinos for Good Governance. Yes, I think I asked you a year ago, what are the connections between the Marcos family and Duterte? Has there, I think you were writing a book about it. Has there been any details how Irene Marcos and the family financed Duterte's, campaign for president?
Okay, there are no details about that, except that President Duterte blurted out that the Marcoses had financed him, which the Marcoses quickly um, denied.
Mhm.
Okay, but um, this is only about Duterte and Marcos, right? But
Mhm.
you also you left out Trump. There is a picture that exists.
Mm.
I have it somewhere in my files. You see a very young Donald Trump, and then you see a younger Imelda Marcos
Mhm.
seated on the same table. They knew each other way back.
Mhm.
And it's very interesting that Trump should get to buy the Trump Tower
Yes.
that exists right now. That was one of the sequestered buildings. That was one of the buildings that was the subject of the anti-racketeering
Mhm.
how do you call it? RICO
Yeah.
Mhm.
Rico.
law, you know? And so I'm wondering why Trump got to buy it, you know? So, okay, so I suspect that the link between uh, Trump and Duterte passed through Marcos.
I see. Very
I
good.
think that was how it was. That it was the Marcoses. The Marcoses, it's very interesting about the Marcoses, no? When Imelda Marcos first went to Congress, she was the poorest congressman, and it was seen in her statement of assets and liabilities. And now she's one of the richest, with no visible means of income
Mhm.
and with no company, corporation that is in the top 1,000. She managed to raise her assets. And also, each one of them, if you look at Bongbong Marcos' assets, he owns like 800 million pesos. And he also, I think his uh, wife is rich in her own right, but not that rich, you know. So there is a lot of money still out there. And now Duterte says, oh, let's have a settlement.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you. Raissa.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, I was one of those students who left school and became an activist. Um, and I was imprisoned under martial law. And I wanted to just chat for a second about the feeling, if you will, of martial law and of dictatorship, because I think for most Americans, it's very hard to envision or kind of visualize what that experience looks like. But okay, I was in prison and I was with people who were tortured, and all of the killings, of course, those are the most significant um, implications or impacts of martial law. But I have to say, in retrospect, for me, the loss of freedom of press was in some ways most shocking and dramatic, because I had grown up in the United States and I was just presumed that the press would be able to, if there were two sides, if the government was acting badly. I grew up during the Watergate era, and so the Washington Post, as the entity that took down the Nixon administration, I just took that for granted, that those things were possible. And I just want to recount that in the first few weeks of martial law, first months before I was arrested, it was so dramatic to have no newspapers and no radio and no TV, nothing.
Could we know your name?
Melinda Paras. And so I just want to say, here in this country, I look at what the Trump administration is doing, and I have some confidence ultimately that the truth will be revealed, and this will be an undoing like the Nixon administration. But the fact that the potential loss of the Inquirer and the steps that Duterte is taking towards the reimposition of martial law, as much as I love social media and the democracy of it all, to me, it doesn't take the place of an Inquirer, a New York Times, a Washington Post. Yes, you can paint the media with all the broad strokes of they're bad and they're liars, and but at the end of the day, people count on the journalism.
Do you have a question related to that?
No, it's a thought.
Okay.
Just sharing a thought.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your experience. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I wanted to ask you to elaborate on the links between Trump and Duterte. I think you kind of just did in reference to another gentleman's question, but if you have anything more to share on that.
Should I give him the lead?
He works with me at the,
Okay.
he didn't give you his name or his serial number or his rank, but
I'm sorry, Andrew Beal with the second year student here at the journalism school, and I also do work at the IRP.
Okay.
With
so he's a
John.
good reporter, and he's asking.
Okay.
I mean, I think one thing we will do is follow up on some of the things that you had at the end of your speech, but I think we can do that over email and communication.
Yes.
And I didn't want to sort of steer the conversation. I didn't want to take it down that road where I suddenly was working for my editor here. So I thought, but I mean, I think this whole issue of the building and Trump's relationship to Duterte, I mean, Trump has said, I think, that he would welcome Duterte to the Oval Office, and which I think shocked a number of Americans, that he would extend that kind of invitation. So maybe, without going down the two assignments, maybe if there's other aspects you see of the relationship. Have you ever seen the Trump children, for example, in the Philippines?
No, but there was, okay.
Right, there is a Trump Tower
Yeah,
in
there
Manila,
is.
right? Is that what you're getting at, Andy? I'm not trying to steer the question.
Just you mentioned when you were speaking, you made several references to links between Trump and Duterte.
What you should look at is Manafort, the
Always
lobbyist and the
Manafort,
PR agency, because Manafort had been used by the Marcoses during martial law as a lobbyist, and then I think that is the link between, because the Marcoses really went all out for Duterte, but they masked it by getting Bongbong Marcos to run with Senator Miriam Santiago. So the people really couldn't see that there was a link between Bongbong Marcos, or the Marcoses, and Duterte. And I was told there really is a PR guy who worked on the Duterte campaign, the campaign strategy, and then later on was also worked on the Trump strategy during the last elections. There's a several months gap, right, between the two campaigns.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So we'll, I mean, I think
Yeah.
we can follow up
Sure.
after related to that as well.
Okay.
We have about
Yeah,
5
thank you.
more minutes. Thank you. We have about 5 more minutes. We're going to end at 1:45. So we have about 5 more minutes for questions, and I'm sure afterwards you'd be happy to,
Yeah.
to talk to people.
Hi, Raissa. Raphael Roy. I'm a second-year documentary filmmaker here. I started my journalism career in the Philippines. I lived there in 2014, 2015 for the first time. I attended UP, and I worked briefly at the Philippine Daily Inquirer. And the photojournalists who I talk to now talk about how difficult it is now since the coverage of James Nachtwey and the coverage from Daniel Barahulik, who won the Pulitzer. And I was wondering if you can maybe just offer your opinion about the role of international reporters, perhaps folks who come in and will get the story out and will get the story into the international conversation. But if you can talk a little bit about the sort of mess that's often left behind.
When the international journalists leave. Well, okay. In the Philippines, we call them parachute journalists. We do, because they fly in, and then they get a gopher who does all the work, gets all the interviews, and then they fly out. And maybe they get, uh, I mean, they get a good perspective. Maybe they don't. But you know, journalists, international journalists also do have a role, because they're sort of they also put pressure. They also put pressure on the government, you know, uh, on hot button issues. So it's also important. Okay, I'd like to share something with you that few people know. We do have the wire agencies in the Philippines, but most of them are, well, most of the staff are actually veteran Filipino journalists who rose through the ranks, and they know. And a lot of them have very, very deep sources in the police and the military, so that when, for instance, Reuters says that there is a certain policeman who was hired to do extrajudicial killing, I believe Reuters, because I know the guys who are writing this have very, very deep sources. Okay, the mess, well, yeah, some foreign journalists do leave a mess. And the government, you know, clamps down more on information. And I think that's what's happening now in the Philippines, that the local journalists cannot even get police reports now. They've clamped down on that ever since, you know, foreign journalists had been able to get police reports. Before, I could walk into any police station and get the police report. Now it seems that I have to get the clearance from up there, from the office of the Philippine National Police Director General.
Thank you. I think we have time for one. You were. This is the last question, and then we'll. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Rosales. I was a journalism student in the Philippines before the Marcos declared martial law, during and after. And as a journalism student, we were very involved in the fight against Marcos leading up to and before martial law. And I believe journalists played a very, very big role in exposing all the atrocities of the Marcos presidency at the time before it became a dictatorship. And I was, if you know, as you know, immediately the very first day that martial law was declared, the next day, the very first thing that they really did was to go all the media outlets. They arrested the Rosas family, the Lopez family, that's a Manila Chronicle, the Manila Times, and closed all the radios. There was, like Melina was saying, there was a total silence. Radios, televisions, they were all closed because the media played a very big role in really exposing the atrocities. So I was a very proud activist, and I'm just wondering at this point, where are all the progressive students? Are they involved? Are they active? And I know it's very dangerous. I know what that life is, so being scared. But you know, when you're young, you don't care. You're speaking the truth. You want to stand up for the truth. You want to do that. And I'm just wondering if the journalism students in UP, that's where I was from, were as active or has all this fighting spirit that you are trying to bring forward and standing up for. Thank you.
I was very happy to see that when um, Duterte announced that Marcos was going to be buried at the Hero Cemetery, the millennials, the students came out. And I was very glad for that because it means that information had actually been transferred to the next generation. Okay, this is the problem now with people um, getting the people out. They think that uh, social media is enough, that they fight online, but it's not. It's the warm bodies that make a difference. Um, it's the size of the crowd that makes a difference. And now the church is slowly coming into the picture. They ring the bell every, every evening for mass, but they ring the bell also against extrajudicial killings. What is very disturbing is the politicians. You'd think that they would see that, okay, I'll say it. I don't think Duterte is good for the country. Whatever change that he wanted to come, it's like it's back to the 1972. He wants people to have comfortable lives. But then it seems that the poor are not part of it, at least those who are killed. A lot of the people being killed are the petty criminals and the small, the distributors of shabu. You know, activism. I would like to be surprised. Uh, One thing about the Philippines, it will surprise you. You do not know how, but it will surprise you.
Maybe,
my-
maybe that's a good place to end. I want to thank you especially for
you.
coming. It's really great to have you
Thank you.
talk here. And I want to thank so many of you for coming to the journalism school. I don't know how many of you it's the first time you've been here, but we're very happy to welcome you and to hear these kinds of issues aired at our journalism school. So thank you very much for coming and for the entire audience for participating. And I hope those online also can benefit from hearing from a very experienced and courageous journalist. So thank you again, and we appreciate you coming.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. How do you want to do this? How do we need to turn these off, or do we? Okay. Yeah.
Hi.